When we think about cybersecurity, most of us picture firewalls, endpoint protection, and phishing defenses. Yet one of the biggest risks often begins when technology is retired. As companies refresh their equipment, the question becomes, what happens to the data left behind? In this episode, we sat down with Tom Hoof, Group IT Director at SKTest, and discuss why secure IT asset disposition must be part of every organization's cybersecurity strategy and what businesses can do to protect themselves.
All right, so we finally have the guy behind the SK Test cybersecurity and IT infrastructure. Pleased to welcome Tom with us today. Tell us your background, Tom.
I'm Tom Hoof. I'm the Group IT Director at SKTes, and I have spent the last 20 years in IT. I started off as an apprentice and did IT infrastructure, and then later on I moved into information security and cybersecurity, and that's something that I'm really passionate about now.
Right, so from apprentice to being a genius for over 20
I would
years.
say genius.
So it's a different lens actually from infrastructure to information and cybersecurity, right? So talking about cybersecurity, Tom, so SK Test is urging organizations to pay closer attention to end-of-life IT equipment as a growing cybersecurity threat. Now, why is this stage of the IT lifecycle so often neglected, and what risks does it pose to business today?
That's a really important point. So often the IT asset lifecycle of internal organizations, so laptops, desktops, network equipment, firewalls, whatever it may be, is often a procurement task. There's often procurement managers organizing this, and they may be leased, and at the end of the lease, it just goes back to the supplier. And cybersecurity isn't at the forefront of the procurement manager's mind. But now what we're seeing is that cybersecurity really must be involved in the life cycle of assets and controlling what happens to them. And that's a gap that organizations are starting to take notice of. And then what we're encouraging at SKTES is as a business, we can help them bridge that gap.
Yes, I think that really makes sense because life cycle management, you're right, often ends up sitting with procurement or sustainability teams, right? Because they're responsible for the asset itself. But there's data, right? So on that data and that asset, that's a question, what happens to that, right? And naturally, it brings IT into the picture as well. So what about factory resets, Tom? They say that it's not enough. And what does it like, standards like NIST or the IEEE require?
Absolutely. So something as an organization at SKTES we push NIST Purge or IEEE Purge. So NIST 888 and IEEE 2883 have a set of standards that you should follow when it comes to data sanitizing your devices. And that is something that SKTES does really well as an organization, and we can help other businesses do that. So factory reset is not enough. We've seen, especially in network equipment, residual data still being on those devices. So whether it's network design or VLAN tables or even credentials are still on those devices even after a factory reset and are easily recoverable. This is why NIST Purge is so important. And NIST Purge and IEEE Purge is a physical way of communicating with the device to make sure the data is gone and then verifying that the data has gone. And that's why it's so important to use these sort of frameworks to ensure that your information is permanently gone.
Right. So it's not just like a basic reset, Tom, right? And you were saying we have to have that recognized standard, such as NIST and the IEEE, right? So that we can validate that the data is genuinely gone. So what do you think about the most common compliance gaps when decommissioning IT assets, and what are the potential repercussions?
Absolutely. So we've seen especially in Europe, health records still being on devices when they've gone on to their second life. And you can't think of anything more personable than your health records.
Yes.
And then there's an organizational risk, do you want your company secrets being out there in the world, living on a laptop that someone's using at home that could still easily be recovered? So from a compliance perspective and an organizational risk perspective, it's so important to make sure that data is gone. And then from a cybersecurity perspective, making sure that you haven't left any, hidden credentials or client secrets or any backdoors left into your environment.
Yeah.
So, from a compliance perspective, we really encourage organizations to follow guidelines such as ISO
Yes.
27001 or NIST CSF, or even some now sort of regulations are coming out, such as
Yes.
NIS2 in Europe, which enforce strict adherence to data sanitization principles. Including
Mm-hmm.
fines and penalties. So it's becoming more and more prevalent. So from a compliance perspective, there's things and tools out there that you can use to help, and you don't always need to do the
Yes.
big audits. You can just follow
Mm-hmm.
the framework and implement the framework, and that will
Mm-hmm.
help you bridge the gap.
Yeah, I think those gaps that you're talking about, right, can have far-reaching implications if they're not addressed properly. So, like, how can companies, because we're talking about disposal, we're talking about data purging, right? So, how do you think can companies balance between data destruction with environmental responsibility?
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important to use somebody like SKTES who will ethically dispose of your equipment, and hopefully not dispose of, hopefully refurbish and reuse, and give those assets a second life. So one of the fastest growing waste streams globally is electronic waste, and
Mm-hmm.
organizations like ours, SKTES, we are great at making sure that we reuse those assets and give them a second life.
Yeah.
Whether that's data center equipment, whether it's network equipment, whether it's laptops, desktops, monitors, even. That's where we're really, really great at making sure, one, that we try and give you residual value for that equipment,
Mm-hmm.
certify that your data is gone and it's safe to reuse, and three,
Yes.
if we can't do that, make sure that it's ethically recycled, um, to whatever principle that R2, and there's some
Mm-hmm.
other standards, different scope emissions and things that we can help with as well.
Yes, yes. Tom, that really shows how data security and environmental responsibility don't have to be at odds, right? They don't have to be on the
Correct.
opposite ends. With the right standards and processes, organizations can achieve both. So,
Hmm.
Tom, with nearly 20 years that you've mentioned earlier, right? And now your recent full membership of the Chartered Institute of Information Security, what advice would you give to IT leaders, and what practical steps can they take to better embed secure ITAD into their cybersecurity strategy?
Yeah, so uh, CSEC is a great organization for highlighting cybersecurity risk, and I know that they align themselves to the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, and they
Mhm.
highlight end of life assets as a massive risk. And often at cybersecurity events, you'll hear, are you doing your phishing attempts? Are you training your employees? Are they doing awareness? When actually one of the biggest risks is when you're finished with your laptop,
Mhm.
what are you
Yeah.
doing with it?
Mhm.
So my advice to any organization that's managing the life cycle of assets is, one, implement a framework that you can follow. ISO 27001, NIST CSF2, and then also dig more into that. Look at the frameworks around your data. What
Mhm.
happens to the data itself, and how are you certifying that it's clean? If you're currently using an IT asset disposal partner that is only factory resetting, your data can be recovered. A logical reset of data is not enough in most circumstances.
Mhm.
You need to use a physical method of data destruction, which is where you're talking to the firmware on the device to wipe it. And that is what NIST Purge and IEEE Purge enforces. So use an ethical partner like SKTES that can help you. We can certify that, and follow a framework to implement the controls. Or there's, in the industry, we use a term called TOMS. Not my name, but it stands for technical and organizational measures. So not just a technical control of what happens to that asset, but an organizational control. Organizational measures: when an asset is returned, it must have come to this team and it must be sent to this partner like SKTES that will ethically dispose and or reuse your asset, but then also make sure your data are safe.
Right. Tom, I love how you frame it. While while certifications are very important, it's really more on embedding recognized frameworks, right? And partnering to the right life cycle service providers such as SK Test, right? So thank you so much for your time and sharing your experience with us. There's a lot more to digest actually for IT and security leaders to take away and certain plenty to reflect on. But I think that's all we have right now. I just need to to really dig deeper on this cybersecurity, and I think this is not the last time. So we hope to continue your conversation and welcome you back in a future episode with exploring more topics across cybersecurity.